Hello, everyone. I'm Jade King, lead features editor for thegamer.com, and we are here for a Final Fantasy VII Rebirth roundtable. We'll be talking a lot about the game, a little bit about spoilers, but we'll be sure to warn you about that before we get into the nitty gritty. I'm joined by editor in chief Stacey Henley.
Hello.
And Evergreen editor Quinton O'Connor.
Hello, hello.
We have all played a lot of Rebirth, I assume.
Yeah, I'm at chapter 10. I know you two have finished it, so the ending stuff, you unfortunately won't have my dulcet tones in your ear, but I'll be here for the rest of it. Quinton, you're finished, right?
Yes. I'm about midway through a replay, so.
Oh my goodness. I think I'm 85 hours in, and I'm like chipping away at the end game and debating whether I want to do a hard playthrough. I probably won't because I don't hate myself that much. But yeah,
I do
my review.
Quinton is a guides writer, so you kind of have to hit yourself to do that.
Oh, we're lucky. We just need to take advantage of our
just have some opinions. Just think about things. Yeah.
Just have takes, Quinton. But yeah, I scored it 9 out of 10 in my review, which went up a couple of weeks back now, and I've seen online that everyone is slowly getting towards the end. But one of the things that stuck out to me is Rebirth begins immediately after Remake. It wastes no time in trying to get the player up to speed. And as two people who played Remake a few years back and very thoroughly enjoyed it, how do you feel getting back into this world after that long away?
I think it does a really good job of letting you pick up exactly where you left off. I think because we know it's one continuous story, the three of us obviously have played the original Final Fantasy VII, so I know there's some changes to it, but we basically know where it's going. We weren't surprised when we, met Sid and things like that. We knew that was going to be part of the story. So, because it feels a little bit like when something like The Hunger Games came out as a movie, you know exactly what's going to happen in the second one, but you still go and see it, and you're kind of curious to see what things changed. So it's quite nice, I think, to get back into a story that's in motion. A lot of my issues with some of the modern Final Fantasy games have been they take a very long time to get to the point because they spend 5 or 6 hours just exposition dumping. That was a big problem I had with Final Fantasy 16. It takes about 4 hours before you get to actually play. You walk down a corridor and then have another cutscene before anything happens.
It's very Game of Thrones.
Yeah, 100%. So I even though Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has some slower sections at the start, because obviously there's a bit where Cloud is incapacitated and has to kind of crawl through the flames, and that physically moves very slowly. I think it does a really good job of keeping the pacing up and throwing you back into a place where, because the previous game had such a defined ending, it ended with a boss battle, you go to have to escape. Obviously, Sector 7 comes crashing down. There is a sense of a beginning and an ending in there. It doesn't feel like it was just kind of randomly cut into 3 parts. It feels like, like the end of Book 1, the start of Book 2. So I felt it was quite a natural way to slide back into the world. Were you, Quinton?
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. I think the main thing that struck my brain in the first couple of hours of FF7 Rebirth was I just kept thinking to myself time and time again, whenever a publisher markets a game in a series as a good jumping in point, never believe them until you experience it yourself, because it was like, as someone who is invested, obviously, I was like, okay, cool, we're not spending, hours being like, and then this happened, and then this happened. There's the recap video, but I certainly wouldn't recommend someone leap straight into Rebirth, because it really does get the show on the road pretty quickly. It does, the flashback chapter, which makes sense. That's where it's supposed to happen. And then it's just kind of like, all right, you're off. You're off to the races. Here's the grasslands. You played Remake. You know what you're doing. Have fun. And I think that was exactly the way to do it, because really, I mean, marketing has to be marketing, and it's got to say these things to some extent, I guess. But who's gonna seriously be like, I'd rather just start here, So I appreciate that they knew that, and I also agree that Remake had a good structure to it, story wise, and there was a lot of to do about how, yes, it was just Midgar, and heading into that, I was a little reticent too, but I think for me, they managed to make it work, and I think that more or less followed through with Rebirth too. Like, it had its start and it had its end, and it felt like a whole piece in and of itself. So far so good in that regard.
Before we explore a bit of the open world stuff, which is a significant chunk of this game when you take out a lot of the dungeons and the story-based stuff, I think we're clear to talk about the first 10 minutes of this game and what it sets up in terms of narrative and how it tries to tease you about some of the bullshit this game's going to do, without talking about specific spoilers that happen later on, because Stacey hasn't finished the game yet. What did you think of this game's first 10 minutes before you get to that Nibelheim flashback?
Obviously, I don't know exactly where the whole thing ends up, but I've always really enjoyed the Final Fantasy VII, particularly. I think more than the other Final Fantasy. I know everyone's got their own favorites, but it's always seemed the most concerned with trying to build a narrative. A lot of the other games really focus on characterization and relationships and big spectacles, but something about Final Fantasy VII has always had, and there's elements of it you can pick out, and it's Final Fantasy. Obviously, bits are strange and over the top and don't necessarily make full sense when you try and analyze them in depth. But if you take the kind of the leap into this being a fantasy world and understand some of the just innate magic that it has, it's always been very good at trying to tell a story. So I think going back to Remake, which obviously I have more knowledge of having played, there's a lot in that where it teases things that are going to come, or it looks into areas in which there are things it can hint at. There's the scene where I think it's Barrett gets stabbed, and it looks very like when Aerith gets stabbed, and it knows when it shows us that image that we are all like that remembering that. Yeah, exactly.
You've probably seen by now as well. Like Tifa in the live stream, they mirror what happens to Aerith. It's like, oh, are they going to do that? And it grounds that surrealism in the first game. So some of the more ridiculous stuff they're doing here, I think you kind of buy into it. It's not like Kingdom Hearts bullshit to that extent.
It's true to the world.
Justified. Yeah, true to the world.
No matter
I think
how
that's
far
a really
they go.
good way.
Yeah.
And the characters question it in a way they don't in other games. In other games, is just kind of a Joss Whedon style kind of quip of, oh, that just happened. Whereas in this one, especially Barrett and Yuffie are really like, what is going on? Why is this happening? This shouldn't be a thing. So you kind of are almost allowed as a player to think this is ridiculous, to know it's ridiculous, because it's also ridiculous to those characters. Whereas in a lot of games, like Final Fantasy 16, really, huge spectacles happen, and the characters just kind of go, "Okay, time for a fight." They don't engage with it.
Sick.
Yeah, basically,
yeah. Free to the end. Yeah.
So I think that for me is what really works with the opening.
I also think that's, before I answer the question more directly, I think that's a very good point, Stacey, about how, as long as you have characters that sort of lampshade the ridiculousness of something, it tends to go over better, at least with me, and Barrett and Yuffie definitely embody that. But then, there's certainly been a trend in mass media over the past several years where the lampshading just kind of doesn't stop, and everybody starts doing it, and everybody, and obviously, not naming names, but I've seen people say that about Marvel lately, the movies. And I think Final Fantasy VII, and certainly Rebirth, to me at least, it strikes a good balance between the outrageous, the more inherently believable, and then the outrageous reactions and the more inherently believable lampshade reactions. Barrett will be like, I still don't know what's going on, and then Cloud will just be kind of like, it's whatever, and it's like it kind of feeds both sides of me.
Yeah.
And I think that was sort of true with the first 10 minutes too, because Zach is quite a guy. Love him or hate him. Choice with his writing.
Stand-up bloke.
So I just remember this line, because the first 10 minutes he shows up, and it's like, like Jade said, without going into stuff from later on, it's certainly obvious that, just like the ending of Remake, foretold that something weird's going on. Zach is seeing something totally different. He's in this version where like it seems like everyone else died, and he just has this line. It's like, this is all so messed up, and it's like, in my brain, I'm like, well, that's an interesting reaction to seeing all of this, but it's also very Zach-like, and it's very Final Fantasy-like, and it's very FF7-like, and it works. And yeah, every time in the game, and certainly those first 10 minutes of like surprise twist, here's Zach, it always just works. And I think so long as writing is true to itself, I can forgive weirdness.
We'll come back to the tone a little later on, but I want to talk about the open world primarily, because it's been fascinating to see the community react in real time to how this game's open world develops and changes, and in some ways outstays its welcome. Like, Stacey, you've written a couple of bits about this, where the grasslands and Junon to begin with, you want to do everything because all of the quests are really like interesting and they build upon these character relationships. But as you get further and further into the game and the plot picks up and it develops a sense of urgency, the game keeps throwing more of these things at you, like new mini games, new side quests, and some of them it like forces you to do in a way where, when I was reviewing it, I almost felt paranoid that I was going to miss something or wasn't going to get like the optimum experience in some way. So I was wondering, what do you guys think of the open world now you've either finished the game or seen a significant chunk of it?
I think for you two, it's obviously quite different because you both had the game before it came out. So you've got that pressure of wanting to beat it for the embargo. And Quinton, you obviously have got it. You're doing the guides for it, so you want to do as much as you can, but you don't want to get sidetracked with doing all of the early game guides and then not be finished the game by the time it comes out. Whereas I have a very different, much lighter time pressure of, I have other games that I need to review. I know Rise of the Ronin and Dragon's Dogma are coming out, so I want to get it finished before then, but if I don't get it finished, it doesn't really matter. So I was allowed a little bit more luxury, as you say, and the maps... the grasslands in Junon, originally very small, very compact, and as you go into the other maps, they get much larger. But for me, it's not just that they change in size, it's that they change in usefulness. One of the great things with the grasslands is it's very open. There's not really anywhere you can't go. There's not really there's hidden things, but there's no like secrets in the sense of, if you see a cliff, there's always a path around to the top of that cliff. You can maneuver it very easily. And no matter what you're looking for, you'll find something. There'll be one of the combat scenarios, or there'll be a tower, or there'll be one of the secrets you've got to do to get the Chadley combat simulator. You push the buttons as it goes around the gems. Don't really know what that's about. But there's like always a thing to do. It's never empty or wasted space. And obviously I was playing it in real time, writing about it, like, this is great, everything's fantastic, la 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 la. And then I got like the next map, and it's just this huge wasteland of nothing. And I hate this map so much. And it's like, Johnny needs help, you're going to go across the lake. Oh, okay, or you can't swim across this lake.
No,
okay.
That was weird. That was really weird.
And there's some twigs in the way, is kind of all I saw.
Yeah.
I saw all of you like leap a mile into the air at the end of Remake.
Just do that again, lads.
Just do that again.
So yeah, like you go to these like huge places, and suddenly there's lots of roadblocks because they want you to come back later in the story, and then it just gets to the point where it becomes irritating. Like when you go through, I can't remember what the map's called, but it's in Chapter 9 before you get to Chapter 10 before you go and meet Sid. You leave the village, and it says, you don't know it's Sid. We know it's Sid because we played Final Fantasy before. It's just going to go and meet this. I know this guy who's a pilot. And you go, okay, I know who that's going to be. You have to ride the chocobo like through the village, but it has to jump over certain mushrooms, and like you go to a place and there's just like a waterfall you can't go. But I just think, I don't know why this map is here. This isn't like a fun place for me to wander around. This is becoming like an oppressive roadblock. It's not even saying go and do 3 side quests before you can move on. Like, at least that I would understand. At least if there was a kind of, you are not leveled enough. You know, you need to be level 32 before you do this. You're only at level 26. Go and do some stuff. At least there'd be a purpose to it. But it's not even saying, go and do this thing. Go and do this thing. You might like it. It's just, can't get past. And you just have to find a way. So I found it to be just more annoying than anything. And I think especially coming off, I'd been comparing it a lot to Infinite Wealth because I played just before that. They also have a similar compact map that gets bigger and bigger as it goes on. They both obviously have the sub stories, a lot of things that you don't need to do for the game, but that you need really do to experience the game, which I think they both have. And I just felt myself going from these two are really similar. This is great. To why is Final Fantasy not like a dragon? Why can it not just be normal? Why can I not just get in a taxi and go to this place?
You can do that once you finish the game.
Yeah,
but you can't do it right now.
You can get in a plane.
Yeah,
At some point.
I've just got to the bit where you can get in the plane, but it's like you can go back to like this one place, and you've still got to wander around aimlessly.
Okay, give it time. Give it time. I
Yeah.
might say the world opens up more, and I found it more inviting in the end game because I think, as you said, there wasn't that pressure of like, oh shit, I need to. What side quest I complete might impact how like the gold sorter plays out or how the end game plays out. But the game kind of, oddly enough, once you hit credits, it kind of takes all those roadblocks away. And part of me thinks the game would be better if it just didn't have those roadblocks to begin with, because it would make traversing this open world quite inviting and far more enjoyable. Because like when you do fast travel to like the chocobo bus stops or whatever, you can literally choose to be on a chocobo or in the buggy when you fast travel. And that's convenient and cool, but a lot of this convenient and cool stuff is like covered up in nonsense that it's like, this feels like a Ubisoft game from 12 years ago, which is a shame because I suppose we'll move on naturally now to the Affinity system and how a lot of the side quests feed into like these interesting character stories and this pretty strong writing and dialogue. Obviously, the end goal of the Affinity system is like the dates at the Golden Saucer and who loves you the most. Funnily enough, in my review playthrough, I got Barrett, and I was proper like, I was on another podcast talking to people, and they're like, "That's like the hardest one to get, Jade. How'd you get that?" I guess I just did all the Barrett's quests and nobody else's. But I was wondering what you thought of both, like the Affinity system and how this game fleshes out these characters in comparison to the stuff we saw in Remake or the original, even.
I definitely think. I definitely think that FF7 Rebirth is one of the best, not just one of the best modern Final Fantasies, or maybe even just Final Fantasies, but one of the best games I've played in years in terms of fleshing out its characters. And it seems like every moment that anything happens, and indeed many moments where arguably nothing happens, they they manage to get at least one moment in that just endears me to these characters all the more so. And I kind of kept thinking to myself, like, well, if I didn't have this intrinsic link to the original that I do, that a lot of people, but certainly not everyone who played the game does, would I care as much about Cloud? Would I care as much about Barrett? And I kept thinking, I think I would, because the writing is so sharp. The voice acting is terrific across the board, I think. So the way that they do that, I love the Affinity system, and I'll get into that in a sec, but I almost wish that there was like a version of the game without any of that like sort of like pressure, because it's sort of self-inflicted pressure if you care all that much, I guess, who's going to be the date at the Gold Saucer, but I definitely felt it. And Stacey, you mentioned like Quinton, you're doing guides, writing, and that sort of thing. So I felt like I needed to do all of it regardless. But even for like most players who aren't facing that sort of weird, unique challenge, I would imagine that I'm not alone in seeing these new side quests pop up, watching which character shows up at the beginning of a side quest, and you're like, oh, okay, this is going to be a Red 13 quest, and then just being like,
oh, it's Barrett, see ya.
Yeah, I know, it's always just like whoever shows up, just like, I have an opinion on that. It's like, oh, I see where this is going. But like, I love the side quests in this game. I think they're a huge step up from remakes. That sounds like one of Betty's cats, and in the Sector 7 slums, But I will definitely enjoy them that much more. Or rather, I am during my replay, because as cool as that Affinity system is, and as much as it kind of gave me that little like, BioWare King in my brain every now and then, seeing this go up and that go up and the dialogue options. It adds some pressure to me that I ended up disliking a little bit because I wanted Aerith for the date. I really wanted Aerith personally. That's who I wanted. And and Tifa gets like all these side quests like right toward like leading up to that. And I'm like, okay, well, I mean, I'm cool if that happens, that's another angle, but this is not what I'm gunning for. And then I had a friend who was like currently like, I keep finding these Red 13 side quests, and I'm sure that's going to be funny, but like, not what I want. But
I don't want to date the dog.
Yeah.
Cat,
I'll wrap this thought up by just saying that in case folks aren't aware, like once you've finished the game, it's a little more in depth than this, but there's basically an option to like decide between like so long as you were kind of close with someone on the Affinity system leading up to the Gold Saucer Gate, when you go back to that chapter, you can choose, whoever, which is really cool, and I'm glad that they added that at least.
Yeah, I'm surprised to say you went for Aerith. I thought you would have gone for Tifa. I obviously went for Aerith. Aerith is always the one that I gun for. I'm not running Fly Guides, and I do feel that pressure. I currently have Aerith on, I think it's out of 5. I currently have Aerith on 4, Tifa, Barrett, and Red on 3, and then Yuffie on 2. I assume the cat is just out because done nothing.
Oh, they have a date with Vincent and Sid. They're just kind of a bunch of virgins who go on a date together.
You have to like fail at everyone, and then you get this, which is pretty good.
So yeah, I've got like Aerith in the lead, and I am like doing quests, and then like Yuffie says like, "I will no, you won't." Nope, nah, that's okay. Let's continue.
I'll come back to you later.
Let's go and find the Moogles. We're not doing this. So
God, you chose the Moogles over Yuffie.
So yeah, I know Jid, you wrote about this. I know Quinton, you just mentioned it. There's definitely a sense of Bioware in there in how the characters go. And I sometimes think that stress over like who'd you get makes you remember it more, because it does. I understand that it's just going to take away the fun a little bit, because you're thinking, I only want to do quests for this person. And I've made other choices through the game as well. Like on the beach, I went to Aerith's aid in the Queen's Blood tournament. I helped Aerith. I usually have Aerith in my team anyway, because I like having a mage in there. I feel like Cloud and Tifa are very similar fighters, and they do a lot of synergy things together, which I think helps. So I'm kind of naturally leaning towards Aerith anyway. But yeah, I think it's more memorable to have to choose. I remember playing Mass Effect 2, one of the replays I'd done, and there's a choice between Miranda and Jack. They have a fight, and I didn't have enough at the time Renegade or Paragon. I'd obviously triggered it earlier than I perhaps should have, or maybe I wasn't committing to one role as much. And if you don't have enough Paragon or Renegade to shut the conversation down, you need to pick one of them to side with, and the other one is locked out of being a romance option. And you only, if you play as a male shepherd, you only get 3, so you're cutting it down by a third. By failing to do that. But it's also, I think, a lot of people, the character moments that they remember the most, it is that fighter. It's when Tali pulls a gun on Legion, and you have to choose between them. That's quite late, so most people can Paragon and Renegade out of that one. But the Jack Miranda one can be triggered, as I found out, pretty early. I think sometimes making the sacrifices for your characters is the thing that makes you connect with them more, because it is nice at the end of the endgame that you get to see them all. But everyone will have their own version of this story. Like, Jid, you probably wouldn't have picked Barrett if you could do it naturally, but the fact that you got that's going to be a memorable thing from the game.
Yeah, 100%.
So, yeah, I guess I like that games force you to do that sometimes. I remember when Detroit Become Human came out, and it ends with Chloe, the robot the android, who was on the start screen being like set free. That was like a big thematic thing. Like, she was basically your slave. It was not a subtle game. She was basically your slave, and now set her free.
She walks off the main menu.
Yeah, and then people were like sad. Yeah, can I not have Chloe back? You've misunderstood this game entirely, and it's not a hard game to understand. And then they sent an update. We're like, it's not that Chloe. It's a different Chloe. So the one that you had all this time, you've still set her free, but now you have a different person who is subservient to you in every way. who looks
I
exactly
know.
the same and has the same name and the same voice and the same personality. I like that there's a sacrifice element of it, even though it is making me a little bit. Well, I'm pretty close with Tifa, and I want it to be Aerith, so maybe I won't do the side quest for Tifa right now. I still like the balance of it.
Yeah, me too. It's funny you mentioned the the Miranda Jack encounter, and that's something that when I was playing, I was like, I wonder if there's going to be like a Miranda Jack here of some sort. Well, probably not, because Aerith and Tifa are BFFs, which is great. I love
I really
that.
like the way they're written.
Yes, their dynamic is incredible.
Oh yeah. Also, Jade, when you mentioned that you ended up getting Barrett, I understand that in true FF7 Rebirth fashion, because they've fleshed out every interaction so much. I've heard that. Will you agree with this? Like, there's more depth even between like the Cloud and Barrett one than you might have expected.
100%. Because I think in the original Final Fantasy VII, like dating Barrett or pretty much anyone who wasn't Tifa or Aerith was kind of played for laughs. It's like, oh, you didn't get the main romance. But I really respect the Rebirth, not just in the Golden Saucer stuff, but throughout the game, as you're building up this affinity with the characters, it treats it all seriously, regardless of whether it's going for romance. Because there's some moments in that Barrett date scene where it's like, oh, you're making a genuine effort to both flesh out where both these characters are coming from and the stuff they've been through. There's some like emotional moments in Barrett's date, or even Red 13's date, where it's like, okay, they're treating this as a very serious moment, and they're both subverting the original and building upon it in a way that I didn't expect, but looking back, it fits in exactly with the sort of philosophy they're going for with this entire trilogy.
Exactly.
Same with, they could have pitted Aerith and Tifa against each other in regards to like Fancy and Cloud, but it's never played like that. They're always supporting one another. Like you touched on their dynamic. I think that's the same throughout the entire game, and it's done so well.
Yeah. Also, even with Aerith and Tifa being as close knit as they are, which is again like fantastic. Not all their conversations even tend to revolve around Cloud and or Zack, which is just it's one of those things. Like I don't want to drag FF16 through the mud too much.
I do. That's okay.
Enjoy it, but it's okay if we do.
Poor Jill. Oh my goodness.
Poor Jill. God, I hope they give her more to do in that upcoming DLC. But anyway, yeah, there's just a lot of conscious decision making throughout FF7 Rebirth that, to put it lightly, I'd like to see reflected in future Final Fantasies, no matter, which development team is making them. We had that feature on the site. Heck, I'm so sorry. Was it you, Jade, or who was it that wrote it? About how like FF7 Rebirth proves that representation is a choice.
That was Gerald.
It was Gerald, yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. I have it like open on a tab. I intend to read it. But it's so true. Like I'm flying off script here for a sec, but I mean, just like there's so much of that in Rebirth, and quote unquote, it didn't have to be there, and and I mean, like, yeah, it kind of did, and I'm glad it was, but like, it is a choice, and Aerith and Tifa's, whole thing, every time that they weren't like, what's up with Cloud, I was just kind of like, oh wow, that they're having a conversation like two human beings.
Yeah, we do obviously the gamer races each year, our awards for different things in games, and it is going to take something pretty special, I think, for me not to push Final Fantasy VII forward is for character writing. Obviously, Baldur's Gate kind of stormed a lot of the character awards last year.
Yeah,
I think there'll be a bigger mix this year because I don't think Final Fantasy will be anywhere near as dominant as Baldur's Gate. I think it'll be as dominant as Baldur's Gate, but the way the characters are written away from the main narrative, just the interactions that they have, whether that's in the chapter on the beach where you get to play as Aerith and Tifa, whether it's when they're in the background, whether it's the conversations they have with Cloud. I've heard a lot of great things from YouTube and from other people about the Gold Saucer date. I haven't had mine yet, but I'm expected to be pretty good. There's just a lot of really, not really emotional, and it's all really melodramatic and over the top, but quite heartfelt character discussions between the two. Not even just Cloud and somebody else, which a lot of RPGs rely on. You go into somebody's room and you talk to them, and then they tell you a little bit about their life. It's all very natural and occurring in the background in Rebirth, and that's what I think makes it special in a way that is difficult sometimes to ascertain, because it's just not something that we're used to. Seeing we used to characters being alive, and what that means is when we speak to them, they come alive, but they feel a lot realer across the whole game, I think, in Rebirth.
Yeah, because moving on to like the gameplay a little bit, it also serves the storytelling, because there's multiple moments throughout Rebirth where they make a point to split you away from Cloud, either to play as someone else as you're moving through a dungeon or something. There's an early example of that in Red 13. Or like the Aerith and Tifa date in Costa del Sol. It's like, okay, Cloud is busy doing something, but that doesn't mean that these other characters can't exist and matter in their own circumstance here. And that's where a lot of the best writing is.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think the Final Fantasy fandom, much like many fandoms for sure, a lot of folks, certainly myself included, a big draw is basically any installment, whether it's mainline, spin-off, whatever the heck, that has a good cast of characters. I mean, it's not rocket science to think like, oh, people who like RPGs might care about, the characters in them, because that often goes part and parcel, but not necessarily. And leading into Rebirth's launch, I saw so much hype from people online, offline, whatever, that were just kind of like, if you were to ask them, what are you looking forward to the most? You get some diverse answers, but a lot of the time it would be something like, I want to see how they handle, this thing for Barrett. I want to see how they do this thing with Red 13, referencing how things were in the original game. And not only do I see a lot of positive reception to the answers to those two questions and so on and so forth with the characters, but there's so much more that wasn't in the original. Like, we were talking about the Aerith and the Tifa part in Costa del Sol. There's this part in Gungaga, so chapter 9, where
that's the village I couldn't remember the name of. Yes.
Yeah. It's such a distinct name, Stacey, Gungaga. But yeah, like suddenly you're Tifa because plot reasons, etc. And it's just, every time they do that, they also make sure to pepper in some good character moments. So it's not even just kind of like, oh, I'm Tifa now, which is cool, this is, shaking things up. But they always know to make sure that when you're playing as someone else, it's a good, important time to spotlight that characterization in a way that you wouldn't necessarily get when Cloud, nothing against him, he's a great character, but when he sort of naturally, via protagonist syndrome, might have otherwise usurped the scene, because it's like, what's going on in Cloud's head, and that's not even something that necessarily happens all the time, because again, like everywhere you go, you walk into a new town and everybody has their own thing, and Yuffie's humming, some, remix rendition of a new Nobuo Uematsu theme, and you're wondering how the heck that happens, but again, FF.
That's weird. Very meta, isn't it? Yeah, when you think.
Yeah, it's extremely meta. It's like meta, because like the trilogy is all like, look how meta we are, and then you've got Yuffie like adding lyrics to her theme from FF7. But anyway, it's a lot of the kind of thing that I'd like to see in other Final Fantasies. I mean, it draws people in, like ask 6 people who are into, RPGs, specifically any, from like big or even small Japanese developers, like, what's one of your favorite series? I would think 4 of them at this point would say Persona, and then you ask them why, and all 4 of them are likely to say, well, let's see, first, I like the characters, and
yeah, I think that's been a big reason why Fire Emblem has gotten so popular recently, why there was a little bit of not a backlash, but a little bit of disappointment with the one with Aaliyah, the most recent one.
Engage.
Thank you. Because Three Houses has those excellent character dynamics.
It's basically a Persona game in a lot
Yeah,
of ways.
but that's it. It's like Persona. I know 4 was popular, but I think especially 5. Not so much on Three Houses, but just on this on the wider JRPG fandom in general. It's had a really big impact from moving away from things needing to be huge set pieces. That's always been a really defining aspect of the JRPG. Massive boss battles that take a long time, high difficulty curve, just building and building and building on the wildest plot threads you can imagine. And I think there's been a real effort to increase in the last, I don't know, 10 years, something like that, towards character dynamics. They've always had interesting characters. I mean, the characters that we're talking about here existed since, 97, I think was when the first one came out. So it's not like Japanese writing have just discovered cool characters. Like, there's go throughout like Japanese culture, there's a million different stories that are built on individual characters and relationships and dynamics. But it feels like the JRPG as a whole has really embraced this idea of these people are your friends. They want the player to feel like that. And to do that, they need to connect with them on a level deeper than this character is really, really strong against wind damage. You know, they need to have something about their heart that is worth caring about. And I think Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which obviously builds on Remake and which in turn builds on the original, does a really good job of drawing that out of characters where it previously didn't always have space to shine.
Yeah.
Before we get into spoiler territory and so on, the combat in Rebirth is very much iterative in comparison to Remake. Like, it kind of has a lot of the same mechanics, but it builds on a lot of stuff like the synergy attacks and so on. And I was wondering, having finished the game, Quinton, and having done a big amount of it, what are your like biggest takeaways from the combat system in this? Because I think for me, it's probably still one of the strongest like hybrid real-time battle systems we've ever seen.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, I can pick out quibbles with it, you know, for sure. Especially with a game this long, it's hard not to, you know, with combat. But like even then, there's so much customization, you know, involved in like how, well, maybe not customization so much as just like different ways that you can approach so many different fights. Yeah. And I remember when I played Remake, certainly thinking, oh, this is a terrific foundation for a battle system that I'm glad to hear sounds like is more or less going to stick around for all three, or well, however many. I don't think we knew at that point. But then I would also say, like, well, you know, one thing that I missed, because I replayed the original FF7 afterward, and I was like, oh man, there was so much more materia in this. But that makes sense, because Remake's just Midgar. And then it's like everything that I would have stopped back then and thought, like, oh man, you know, I hope that they add more of X, Y, or Z, you know, as they go forward. They did. If like I don't know the statistics on this. Someone out there is going to be like, Quinton, that's not right at all. But it feels like there's like 3 times as much materia or something like that.
I think the fact that Yuffie always mentions it adds to that.
True. And also, they really committed across the board in every aspect of this game to that strong attention to characterization, because synergy, you know, like, hello, like the big fancy synergy abilities. And like you mentioned earlier, Stacey, the first time that you use one of the big ones that combine 2 characters, it does say, like, you know, your relationship with Barrett changed because Cloud just did a cool pose next to Barrett, you know. So Barrett, I guess, is just kind of like, yeah, I like that pose, you know, let's go on a date later. But like,
what happened to Jade?
Yeah. But like, all of that, like, they took the bone structure of Remake, which was already, you know, great, and they really, I can't think of anything that they did with it that I disliked, that I felt oh well, this is too much. I would say maybe early on I was certainly kind of bewildered about what certain things were. I think maybe the terminology on certain things could have been used a little bit better or applied a little bit more strongly, because, like, you know, and this again is like a guides writer thing, but like having you explain, because, you know, people might get confused, like, Oh, you're thinking of synergy abilities. Like those are the ones where you have like, Avalanche two-step with Tifa and Barret. I'm talking about synergy skills. You see, those are the ones that it's just like one character, you press this button, and it's like, oh Lord. But like once you get past that initial hill, that might apply, it all clicks well together, and I didn't get tired of it at any point, which is kind of hard to do, I think, with RPGs of this scale, is to never feel like, oh, this is getting kind of mundane now, Thinking back, like, I like turn-based RPGs a lot more than a lot of people, maybe, but, like, that sort of feeling of, like, here we go, I'm pressing the attack button again. It never really hit me in Rebirth.
Yeah, I started at the game in 2021, just after Remake, or about a year, I guess, after Remake had come out. So I didn't cover it that much at the time, but just the nature of this job and how much we write, you just kind of sometimes write something when it's not timely just because you feel like it. And I remember quite early on writing about the combat system in Final Fantasy VII Remake. And I think, I can't remember exactly what the headline was, but it was something like, I felt it was the best combat system since Batman Arkham. At the time, there was a lot of discussion, obviously, about Spider-Man and other games that had built on the Arkham system. Didn't really feel like there was a successor to that. Even looking back at Spider-Man 2, it's still just kind of the Arkham system with some other stuff going for it. That was a really revolutionary combat system. I have the gadget wheel and the ducks and things, and I felt like Final Fantasy VII's felt like something that was fresh, but still felt as intense, because you've got very heavy combat systems like, say, God of War, where it feels really powerful, but it's perhaps isn't trying to meld different ideas together as well as Final Fantasy VII, well, Remake originally does, where you've got, it's somehow both real-time and turn-based, because got the ATB, so you've got a lot of decisions with when do you use each attack, which one do you use. I had the assess materia on Cloud, so at the start of every battle I would kind of get Cloud up and then assess, then figure out who was going to then be attacking in what way. But other characters, I know Tifa and Barret definitely do, and Aerith as well, she has, well, I gave her the Prey materia, have moves where you need both bars filled. So it's not just a case of attack, okay, now do a powerful attack. It's biding your time, figuring out which attack to use when, thinking about when you want to use the pressure and the stagger attacks, and who's going to be using them, what's the best use of that. And also, every time you use certain attacks, you get a little point towards the synergy meter. So there's lots of thoughts that you have, and yet at the same time, it's all a very, very satisfying stab, which I think a lot of turn-based games don't have, because you can spend your time, whether it's a game like Persona or Pokemon, or whether it's tabletop games, you spend a lot of time preparing your attack and doing a thing, and then wait, and you kind of everything comes back around. Whereas in Final Fantasy, it's always very active, it's always very fast and fluid. And I think, obviously, Rebirth is not as revolutionary as Remake, because it's just Remake system again, and that makes sense. It's the second part of a trilogy. We wouldn't expect it to be a game changer. We'd expect it to iterate and improve. But I think more materia, a greater focus on the character dynamics. And I don't know if this is just because I hadn't played it in a while, but I felt like there was a lot less focus this time around on you need to stagger your opponents. I know that's still important, especially in the harder boss battles, but in Remake, that was the only thing you were trying to do. Didn't matter what attack you used until they were staggered. It was use attacks that stagger them the most, then use attacks that damage them the most. Whereas this time, there's a big trade-off of, do you want to try to stagger them, or is that something that takes you a very long time to get to, so you're better off trying to inflict raw damage, or you're better off using quicker attacks, because then you get the synergy attacks and you get to bring more elements into play. Some of the synergy attacks obviously gave you, they split your ATB bar up, so you got 3 instead of 2. And then, I think this was in the original, well, in Remake, I definitely feel like it's more here. The characters who will absorb certain attacks, so like if you attack in a robot with a lightning attack, they feed on that power rather than just it being resistant to it. It actually makes them more powerful. So I think there's a lot more thought goes into using a system that, at its best, is completely brainless, because it's just run up to them with Cloud, hit them with your sword as many times as possible. And I think the fact that it allows for both, for quite a few of the battles, obviously some of the trickier ones you'll need specific strategies, but when you're just roaming in the open world and you find like some goblins or some like hairy little hedgehog people with leaves stuck to the face, you can just kind of go
you can just
stab.
Batter it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And every character is really different as well. I wasn't sure what the cat would be like. I keep calling it the cat because I don't like that they've changed it to Kate Sith. So I'm just going to say the cat.
Combine both. You say like Ket Sith or
yeah.
you know.
It's the normie way of saying it, isn't it?
So the little ugly cat fella. I really don't like him anyway. But his attacks are really cool because obviously you've got your right on the big chewy Moogle. You've got the roll and the dice. The roll and dice I didn't think was very effective, but it was just really fun to do. To just like be up against this like huge mech, and he just goes, "I rolled a 3." While Barrett has like a rocket launcher. So there's a lot of personality in every attack, which I think is, for me, my favourite part of the combat. Even though the thing that makes it good is the thing they've just said about the speed and the terror. It's just every time you play as a different character, other than perhaps Tifa and Cloud, I think are very similar, there's a lot of personality in how they go about the combat.
And it works so well with like the specific strategies, the specific fights in the game rather, that do benefit greatly, more from one strategy or another. I think it's great that they like the Fiend intel in the open world regions. Like a lot of the time it'll have objectives, and it's like, okay, in this particular case, there is maybe a bit of a puzzle involved because perhaps pressuring them and thus staggering them, which is one of the objectives for this fight, there might be more of a twist to it than a lot of the just like, it'll say like, oh, this enemy's weak to Blizzard, so do that. Sometimes you have to think outside the box a little more. So you get to see that, and in those kinds of fights, and then in the combat simulator, some of the harder ones, is where I think, at least for myself, I got the most feeling, like the feel for how to play each character, because I would come up to something and whatever the objective would be, I'd be like, oh, I don't know how the heck to do that. If I was fighting that little goblin, I probably would have just bashed it, and which is again good, it works for there. But I ended up you don't really main a character in this, which is a good thing too. You're rotating a lot, but like I found myself using Yuffie a lot more than I thought I would, because her like elemental ninjutsu, where like you throw the shuriken, and then you kind of like imbue it, and it starts doing and she attacks very quickly, so it's like you imbue it with fire, and the enemy's weak to fire, and then it almost turns into like a button masher a little bit, because you're just kind of like oh, I'm gonna have it hit, I'm gonna have it hit, and then I'm gonna follow it up with one of these other attacks and that sort of thing. And it works so well for me for helping to pressure so many enemies, that I would find myself thinking sometimes like, oh, I wish I had Yuffie here, and then if she's not, and then I'd be like, okay, well, let me try this, and then I would find out that the cat was quite good at like this sort of thing instead. And it's
I
like
think each time you get a new character, there's this encouragement to try to use them a little bit.
Yeah. I was finding new little twists and eccentricities on my strategies up through the final boss.
Speaking of twists and final bosses, do you two want to get into the ending, and I'll...
We're going to send Stacey off to Nibelheim to talk about the ending very briefly. Quinton, what did you think of the ending?
They can't unite again.
I think I speak for a lot of people when I say it took me a moment to think a lot about it before I could really give you a concrete answer. A lot happens, and some of it is pretty vague, right? And
yeah, because it's Aerith both dies but doesn't. It's
Schrodinger's Aerith.
It's like Schrodinger's. It's like the Joker in Arkham Knight. She's kind of She seems to be lingering somewhat.
I like it
into the third game. Yeah, me too. I was down. I didn't think a lot of people were telling me it was going to be controversial, but it seems relatively faithful to the original. It's just putting a different spin on things.
Exactly, and and I saw this in quite a few reviews and early impressions. Well, I guess just reviews too, where like someone would mention, the story is good. If you weren't keen on the meta stuff that built in remake, you might not like this either. And yeah, that's fair. I mean, they certainly go quite ham with the multi-dimensional stuff in those last couple hours, and adding context to suddenly, so that's what's been going on with Zach this whole time, and et cetera, et cetera. But in terms of like the broad beats involved, maybe they could have been clearer with certain things. I don't know where the line is drawn between, the developers have been saying in these interviews a lot, like, oh yeah, no, we want everyone to speculate, on this, that, and the other thing. So it's like, okay, well, cool. I got the impression that there are a lot of things going on in that last, like, really hour and a half, but like especially the ending, that I wasn't supposed to have a definitive answer yet. And people are putting together these big pieces now that are like, this is what this means, this is what this means, this is what this probably means. And that's all well and good. I do think that there might have been a bit more clarity in certain areas without divorcing the writing from that push. But apart from that, and that's something that I felt at the end of Remake as well, I was like, oh yeah, this is really cool, I'm down for this. I do wish that they gave us a little bit more info on that. And I think maybe, if anything, that's exacerbated with Rebirth's ending, but also just a lot is going on, and it's pretty cool stuff. Apart from that, I think it's a good ending, and we'll get the answers that we get when we get to Regenesis, Reunions, Revengeance, whatever.
Reawakening, whatever.
Reawakening, Revival, call it that. Yeah, we'll see how that goes over. I will say,
as a closing point, I'm surprised by how much they're sticking to the original narrative to an extent, because it ends with them getting on the plane and then essentially going, Sephiroth's in the north, we need to go after him. And I imagine it's going to tie together this open world into the next game in some way and relive out all those moments. And I think Aerith is going to stay not alive in this universe, but there is some allusions in the dialogue, especially from Zack, about like reversing fate or possibly bringing her back. But regardless of what it does, I think Aerith is going to have a relatively present role in the third game, either as a companion to Cloud and not a playable party member. But I think in the original, like, she is praying to save the planet even after her death. I think they're going to roll that into like a much more present role in whatever this third game is going to be, because there's a lot of like exploration of the emotional impact of that death you could explore that they didn't in the original. And there's also moments in Rebirth which are from the last third of that game, which they're probably going to explore in a different way now. But yeah, I'm excited. I was pretty positive about the ending.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I'm really looking forward to with Part 3, with regard to really just the ending of Rebirth, is if they nail this particular aspect as well as they nailed just about everything in Rebirth, I theorize that there's going to be a big push, as Aerith is going to kind of have the best of both worlds here, because she'll be very present, like you said, probably, we don't know for sure. But also, I think there might be this arc for Cloud and possibly the rest of the party of just kind of like, you're dealing with this weird funkiness. Cloud at least knows about it, where
weird funkiness.
Yeah, but ultimately, you do have to let go. Right, if that's where it goes, where it's just kind of like she's going to be helpful, she's going to be great. Cloud at least will be able to see.
But like, she's gone. Like that grief is a very important part of the original game. And I thought in Rebirth, at the end of Remake, they do tease that maybe like Wedge and Biggs and Jesse are alive. But there are definitive moments in this game where they basically go, no, they're dead. Mourn them, move on. And the fact that they've done that makes me think they're going to do the same for Aerith. Like they're not going to, despite reversing fate, they're not going to compromise on the power of that grief in their own storytelling. And I think that's the most important thing.
Exactly. Couldn't agree more.
But yes, this has been a long-winded roundtable, and I hope people got the context from that tiny bit of ending discussion. We'll probably have more on the site in future as we explore the ending and what this means for the third game. But yes, I've been Jade King at thegamer.com, and if you haven't already, please check out my review of Rebirth on the site, plenty of other features, a lot of Quinton's guide work. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and visit us at thegamer.com. That's thegamer, no spaces.